I am not a flop. Not flop. Not a flop. Hop. Not a blob. Not a crop. Not a drop. Not a knob. Not a drop. Not a dropout. I am not a prob. Stop, stop. Stop. Prop, stop. The flop. Stop, blop. Think, top. Flip, flop, flop, hop. Hop to flop. I am top. I am no drop. Stop, stop. The pop, top. The flop, top, top. Top job. Pop, 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 dump, dump. I am not, nope, note, not a flop, not a flop. I am not a flop. I am not a flop. I am not a flopper. I am not a flopper. I said it. I am not a flop. I am not. Even if that is what they want me to be. And that is precisely what I came here today to talk about. I know about flops. I've had my fair share of them. I'm kind of an expert. Look, I admit it, I traffic in lousy films. Shim Sham Shimmy, The Shrimp on the Barbie, Blood-Sucking Pharaohs of Pittsburgh, time fillers. But you know what? That doesn't make me a failure. If success, as Joe Scanlon puts it, is based on circulation rather than recognition, and certainly I've made it. You all know me. You've all seen my movies, mostly on television. But maybe you've never noticed my name at the end of the credits. Honestly, I think that there's not enough time given to credits, or too many people are credited in the credits, which discredits the whole thing. But my name is not important. It is Alan Smithee. It's my name, but it's a made-up name. If you're a bit clever, you know, you can rearrange the letters and you can spell out alias men. What's it like to be an alias? I'm going to tell you. Good afternoon, or good evening, sorry. Before I begin, I would like to thank Vincenzo de Bellis and Fabian Leva and everyone here at the Walker Center that has helped to make my appearance here today possible. Thank you. You know, when Mario García Torres initially talked to me, I must admit that I was a little bit skeptical about this whole idea. I mean, first of all, I'm not even sure how many of my films that Mario has seen, but he really didn't ask me to speak about my films, even though that's usually when people are interested, what they want to know. In fact, Mario's instructions were pretty vague. After giving it some thought, I now think that it was kind of a ploy set up by this artist, you know, to try and set up a situation and see what happens. To set up a situation and see what happens. But while we discussed this presentation, I must say that, you know, Mario had a few points and he managed to convince me of a couple, but most of the time we completely disagreed. So this is going to be my personal take on it. Let's make it clear. I am not a front man for Mr. García Torres. Okay, I should start by introducing myself. As I mentioned before, I am a filmmaker. I make films. I'm known as Alan Smithee, or Alan with an L-A-N, or sometimes Adam, but the name is not important. I mean, it is only important insofar as it gathers together a certain group of works. Sometimes I think that might not actually be a guy. Maybe I'm a woman or a collectivity. I mean, I could have been a Walter Plinge, Georgina Spelvin, or David Agnew, or Procopoulos. You know about Procopoulos. Paul Procopoulos is the pianist. It's an amazing story, but I don't think that I should get sidetracked so early here. I'm going to keep that for later. Anyway, Smithee is a pseudonym. You know that. Sometimes I like to say it, though, to be perfectly clear. I am the name that film directors use when they want to withdraw themselves from the films that they have made for whatever reason. Shame comes up a lot. If you're a film director, you disagree with the studio that hired you, or you don't like the way that they cut the film, you don't want to be connected to it anymore, then you can appeal to the Directors Guild of America. They'll review the case, and then if it's approved, they will take your name out and they put mine in its place. Alan Smithee. Alan Smithee has 77 films to his credit today. It's complex and it's remarkable for various reasons. But today, more than looking at each one of my films, I am more interested in thinking of the whole phenomenon, the production as a whole, as a creative act. A spontaneous, surefire creative act. Is it possible that an awareness of dishonor can become a creative act? Is it possible that a creative withdrawal can become a creative act? I think that it can. I am the product of it. Not my films, me. Their shame produces Smithee. I'm an idea. I am just an idea. I am the data face of the corporation. Their most avant-garde creation to date. It's a strange, it's this revealing fact. Sometimes the movie industry is more avant-garde than the avant-garde. I'm an idea that was invented by this small group of property intellectuals. We call them what they are, the lawyers. And then it was developed by an ever larger and more heterogeneous group of artists and pranksters. It has to do with the position of the auteur on cinema. In my case, I have my own arguments about this, but I'm going to get to them in a moment. I have been around since 1969. Yes, I need to define myself before I get carried away. I'm a text. I am a script. I am not a person. Essentially, I am a story written by a mistaken outcome of life. Like, I know that this is an artist's work, and I should probably talk about that. In truth, I don't get many invitations like this. Maybe that's because people know that the guy who shows up to speak might not actually be me. But by this time, you know that I'm being played by a performer. His name is David Dastmalchian. He works in Hollywood as an actor, playing a lot of bad guys, or that's what he's mostly known for, I think. What I mean is that that's what he does. He stands in. He puts a face to a name, and then when he reads this text, I'm sure when he looked at it, I'm sure, that he thought maybe, oh, I can indeed become Alan Smithee too. And apart from the appearance and the age thing, I think he's doing all right. See, once there was this guy, he had this idea of impersonating me too, and it was like not an artist, but it was somebody in the entertainment business, and he had this thought like it would be a really good way to get ahead, to jump on my bandwagon. So considering all the work that I had done, or that I'd done for others, really, to pretend to be me, for instance. a self-ready-made man. Anyway, I should stop talking about myself, my persona. I was not invited to do that. Anyway, this is probably the only chance that I'll have to defend what I have done in the last decades as a productive effort. I want to make success out of disenchantment. I want to make success out of disenchantment. I want to make success out of disenchantment. Look, I'm not perfect. My arguments may have holes. It may be unsound. But at least I'm honest, you know? This is what I am, and this is what I have become. Sorry. Oh, can you bear with me for a second? I'll make some sense of this. Hold on. Oh, God, there's like tons of anecdotes about my career. You know, you might find these really interesting to listen to. First, did you know, example here, that the first ever mention of my name was not in a Guild's lawyer meeting room, but it was actually in a film? Yeah, it was, you know, it was in Mr. Arcaden, classic movie from 1955 by the great Orson Welles. It was also known as Confidential Report. Through the title character of Mr. Arcaden, I am linked to the enigma of origins, the failure of memory, and a great criminal conspiracy. In the film, when Wells' mysterious tycoon figure feigns amnesia, this other character, this counterpart, wonders whether Mr. Arcaden is not Arcaden after all, but maybe somebody else, someone named Smithee. Mr. Arcaden is also the title of a novel that was supposedly penned by Wells, but he didn't write a word of it. And the movie is a mess. You know, the studio cut it without the director's approval, no input. It was a mutilated film. We've got a ghost-written book, the story of a fake amnesiac. In other words, a real Alan Smithee production. A good case could be made that Smithee and Wells belonged together. They were natural bedfellows. Oh, take Wells' last cinematic performance as the voice of the evil robot planet in Transformers the movie. Not the Michael Bay monstrosity. No, the original, the animated one. That certainly should have been a Smithee. Maybe we'll leave that for a second lecture. Okay. I don't want this to become again. You know, everyone expects mediocrity from me, and I hate to disappoint. It's almost as bad as saying no. I mean, mediocrity knows nothing higher than itself. What else can you ask for when you trust yourself, even if others think it's not enough? I mean, would talent make you a better person? If you manage to finish a film, really finish a film, more than one of you here are going to agree with me, it's a huge personal success, regardless of public opinion. Actually, mediocrity is something that I should have prepared for. I have a few things to say about it, but it's slipping my mind. You know, it wasn't always like that. Not everything that I made was bad. Or more and more, thinking that like the things that were perceived as bad aren't. Look at the first film that I made. As I said, my first movie was released in 1969. It was all very, very serious then. It was a cowboy story, and it got some good critical notices, like sharply directed by Alan Smithee, who has an adroit facility for scanning faces and extracting sharp background detail. That was the New York Times. Of course, I learned all of my reviews by heart when they come out. Smithee's direction keeps the action taut, and he draws convincing portrayals from the supporting cast. That's variety. You know, I do like to read my reviews. After all, they're an irrefutable proof of my existence. I mean, this is just the beginning. My bibliography is actually not that bad. There's actually, there's quite a decent academic book about it. It was published by the University of Minnesota Press. I mean, not that I agree with everything that they say in the book, but it's an okay read. It's like a collection of essays. It's by different intellectuals. And at first it defines my films as these throwaways, which I could totally cope with. But then it says that recent Hollywood cinema can be studied through them, which I find a bit academic. See, a couple of decades later, I made some films that came before. I mean, it was already the 1980s when I realized that I had made some films before '69 when my first film was released. Some might say that those were a bit out of sync with the production of the time. Yeah, like one day I realized that I had some earlier films. I mean, if you followed me, you must have realized this too. Like, that is how it works for me. Once they actually withdrew a piece from my filmography and then years later they put it back, it was kind of a strange feeling, but you get used to it. Lately, a promotional film for housing development, something that I've never done before, and a short story set in London have become my earliest works. They're from 1965 and 1955, respectively. Most of them are forgettable. One very dear to me, though, is this film that was released in 1968. It's a love story. Happens during the making of another film, and it's the story of an editor and an extra hired to work on the film. Now, some people have written that I am portraying someone specific, but I don't see it that way. I am not in the business of making cinema about cinema. I'm in the business of making sure that films have a director. Actually, talking about cinema this year, I got a new film attributed to me. I'm really curious about it. They say it's a film in which you learn how to write and produce and sell your feature film. It's sort of a documentary where everyone in the industry is interviewed. It's titled $1 Billion Weekend, and it's in post-production right now. I can't wait to see it. In the last few years, it seems I have been making trips to the Valley. Of course, those guys are wise. You know, they realized that I had a great background, and really, it's not a joke. I've made quite a few porns, and certainly, it's not the best thing a pseudonym can do. Look at poor Georgina Spelvin. I mean, she had quite a career. In the sneaky business of becoming a nobody, which she actually played quite smoothly. She was an alias for an actor who didn't want her real name to be known, or who was playing a part so small that, you know, the credit would be like an embarrassment to her. Then in 1973, she became a famous actress that she epitomized like the era of porn chic. I mean, she was almost imperceptible in the theater scene, really very discreet. But she played this like fundamental role. She was never really there, but everyone, actors, directors, crew people, they talked about her. Like, it's a long story, but it's one of the reasons why lately I have been trying to give my own work a last chance. Okay. So if this all seems misleading to you, let me just say that it is very confusing for me as well. Then again, I might be able to come up with an explanation, or at least a narration that makes some sense in the most conventional way. In the end, my life is like film. time is experienced linearly, but it's actually practiced sporadically and it's spliced together from multiple currents. I mean, what is time if not this, fundamental intellectual structure, right? It's not as events are just simply happening and then that's that. Time is an invention. It's an arbitrary, indefinite, continued progress of existence, which sometimes gets crumpled and crushed and reversed in films, and more so in my films. Sometimes strange things happen to the stories that I tell. It's kind of like that story of Wittgenstein. He was telling it about the man who went and bought the newspaper, and he bought it every hour, and then he wanted to read it every hour to make sure that nothing had changed. So he would sit in his living room and he'd read the newspaper, and then an hour later he'd go to the newsstand and he'd buy the same newspaper, and then he'd take it home and he'd read it in his living room, and then like an hour later he'd go back to the newsstand and buy the same newspaper and he'd read it again, and then like an hour later, he goes to the newsstand, buys the same newspaper, takes it home, reads it again. And he goes buys the same newspaper, goes to his living room, reads it again. See, I've learned to be very tolerant with time. I mean, sometimes my films are just that. They're time. They are there to make time pass, to create a consistency of progress, mostly through the night. Maybe one day I will retitle all my films with their length instead. A lot of times it doesn't really matter what they're about as long as they fill a specific time span. My longest film so far is 181 minutes. Oh, for example, I was only recently made aware this cowboy movie was made more than 10 years after the fact. I mean, I was supposedly born in 1969, but today my earliest film is from 55. 1955. It's kind of interesting that this is the same year in which the Orson Welles film comes out, right? This is really a key moment in my career, if I may say so. It's where past and present coincide. Believe me, I really wish that one day someone would write an unauthorized biography. Am I becoming too much of Smithee here? It gets confusing up here sometimes. You certainly have a different perception of time here. Oh. Oh, yeah. More and more, I think that this time hopping might be surprising, but it's okay. I mean, I have learned to live with it. Actually, I think that it's great. That's just how my filmography is built, as I was just explaining. I mean, why do we expect artists to create works chronologically at all? Wouldn't it be great if artists created works for different years all the time? For me, if you want to picture it that way, my body is like this automatic sculpture where nobody knows what angle or form will jut out next, not even me. Isn't that a possible future of invention? I mean, I think this is much more interesting than trying to just create this logical progress, trying to make sense as if life was this steady, monotonous onward movement, trying to make sense all the time. For me, if you want to picture it that way, my body of work is like that. I mean, isn't that possible? What was his name? Costa? Eduardo Costa, yeah. So somebody's telling me about his work the other day, and it's really interesting. A simple, sharp piece about the timing of works by different artists. The title of it is something like a piece that's essentially the same as a piece made by any of the first conceptual artists dated 2 years earlier than the original and signed by somebody else. Yes, that's it. Yep. It's a piece that is essentially the same as a piece made by any of the first conceptual artists dated 2 years earlier than the original and signed by somebody else. It's 1970, yeah. What Costa proposes is a reappraisal, not of the artist, but of specific works under different names. He does not want to make works, he just wants to change the authorship of them. And then you note this, it's really fascinating, their dates of creation. He wants to effect a redistribution of the historical record, an anachronism. If you ask me, I would say I very much identify with this. Some of my films have at some point belonged to others. Isn't the meaning of two identical works totally different if they are signed by two different artists? My work exists, then briefly stops existing when the first author discredits them, and then starts existing when they're attributed to me. It's the same work, but they can be read under a whole different framework. Look, see, I'm a filmmaker, but I don't make films. They are slowly incorporated into my body of work. I don't do films. I do filmography. I mean, there are plenty of films in the world, more or less interesting, so why would I wish to add more? Sometimes, most of the time. I feel like the content of the films that I make is not relevant. I mean, what is relevant is that I made them, or the fact that they're now mine. They belong to my filmography. They are legitimate because of me, and I exist because of them. I am a dustbin of creative work, an unlikely collection of artistic rubbish and cobbled together leftovers. You can really make it as a garbage collector. Personally, I never met a piece of film that I didn't like. Maybe I'm more of a foster home, like a shelter for unclaimed orphan projects. A non-author as the organizing principle for a disjointed body of work. Of course, like I said, I don't exist. But then again, here I am. My films are proof of that. I mean, the art world is really invested in words, and I am words. I am written words. I am. Maybe that is why whoever wrote this text thought that it was a good idea to have it presented by some kind of a performer, or to present a performer becoming Smithee. Actually, you might know that this text was actually delivered to an audience once before. It was in London about 11 years ago, if you know that. A few years ago, actually, I delivered this text at a TV studio in Burbank, California for cameras. I am an excuse. I am exempt, a free form to talk about other issues. Or I guess the big challenge is how to use my situation and my issues to turn them into thoughts. Maybe, I don't know. But anyway, I won't bore you with all these technicalities. It's not important to buy time going off of this script, so let me see. Please forget what I just said. My opinions do not necessarily express those of the presenters anyway. Anyway, I won't make this much longer. You know, what is existence anyway? Like when they invited me here, I started to do a little research and I discovered the story of Christopher D'Arcangelo, fantastic artist who all he wanted was to just disappear, to leave no trace, but to be meaningful in some way. I was told that in a show in 1979, he withdrew his name from any of the printed materials about that show, so when the exhibition was documented, he only appeared as this blank. Sometimes I think I could have. Sometimes when I think about the real motivations of those guys who invented Smithee, I think that I am the product of a plot more devious than just cashing in on the auteur theory. And what were those guys who invented Smithee thinking? You know, during the rehearsals, I come to this funny conclusion while we were up here. When they created Alan Smithee, they created a powerful thing. They were not thinking of an artist like the writers of this script seem to think that they were. They were thinking of an even more powerful and ghostly entity. I think they were thinking of Adam Smith. Yes. No, seriously, Adam Smith, the economist and the philosopher from the 18th century, and not just him, but his whole invisible hand theory. Of course, like you all know the metaphor of the invisible hand, the rose-tinted explanation of capitalism meant to illustrate how those who seek wealth by following their individual self-interest assist society in the whole and build the common good. Not that I believe in that, but I really think that they saw Smithee as this unseen power that could spontaneously turn an aborted film into a decent product that could make it marketable. Smithee as an invisible creative hand. Maybe this is just midlife paranoia, but I think that this is precisely what happened, or precisely what I have become. It's this invisible eye that turns unseen, unforeseen actions into a creative order. Not for the good of the market, that never really happened, but into a new paradigm of film production. I know this may sound a bit extravagant, but what I think is really telling, is how economic theories can become creative forces behind avant-garde creations. Look at me, I'm repeating myself again, and I'm sorry. Sometimes when I start believing what I'm saying here, I start to believe, and thank you, my self-ready-madeness becomes a little egocentric. In the end, I'm just an artist that happens to be because of an innumerable number of reasons. At the same time, let's be honest, I am a self-ready-made artist, not just because my name is available for loan to artists, but because the works that I made were all already made. I know that this sounds trivial, but it is not. Again, I don't do works. They get done and then they're attributed to me at some point, and most of them are as unsuccessful in the most banal sense of the term, but they're interesting nonetheless. I am not an artist that already takes a made object and calls them his or her art. I am the verbatim illustration of an autonomous process, at least from me, that is fed by a larger mechanism. I don't have another option but to be what I am supposed to be, a self-ready-made artist, a found failure. And what I like about this is that my films stop being films and instead they become a list can actually create an artistic practice or a bibliography that documents an artist's thought. But you don't have to believe everything that I say. Maybe I just spend too much time with myself trying to argue how I'm a non-productive, productive process. Are you able to make any sense of what I'm saying? It's okay. In case you think that this entire ready-made artist thing is unsustainable, at least you can believe that my most important achievement is not to be a filmmaker, but to be invisible, a creative force that is unseen. I can cope with being that, an unseen creative. In a worst case scenario. Concretely, I am here to ask you to consider whether all those things that people don't want to sign can exist as someone's work, even if they are viewed as a string of failures. Yes, I am here to try to convince you to look at a certain long list of disowned films as someone's creative process. Like I said, I don't exist, and I'm happy about that. I am not supposed to matter. I am happy to be the moniker of some sort of spontaneous order. To tell you the truth, it's the only convincing conclusion that I am able to come up with. Lately, I spend most of my nights reading this scientific stuff, and it's in these kinds of texts that I have happened to find some of my conclusions. Spontaneous order is also a social theory that describes the emergence of various kinds of order created from the combined acts of self-interested individuals who are not intentionally trying to create order. That is precisely what I am, or what my practice is. Even if my filmography grows in a chaotic way, my career is publicly perceived as an organized production. It's the other's disinterest that creates my work. It's the other filmmaker's shame that produces Smithee. Mm-hmm. Okay. You know, the truth is that there's a danger that I may disappear. Lately, it seems that I was a secret at some point. Later, I was a phenomenon in which some people were interested in talking about, but in the last years, I have had fewer and fewer films attributed to me. I fear I'm going to be dead. I'm going to be forgotten after everything that I've done. And I thought, you know, maybe the art world can give me a last thought. I have a hard time saying no. That's truly why I accepted to do this talk. After some long, almost abstract discussions trying to figure it out, I think that they actually wanted me here to talk about failure. Of course, I know something about that, first-hand knowledge, but sadly it's really beyond my expertise to present a history or even a theory of failure. The only thing I would say is that without failure, it's impossible to conceive of the last 2 centuries of culture, and leave it at that. Where would we be without breakdown, collapse, refusal, and dysfunction? It's been a smashing success, hasn't it? Better a productive failure than an unproductive success is my motto. It's there to be taken, too. An unproductive success occurs when something goes right, but nobody knows how or why, whereas a productive failure leads to insights, understanding, and thus an addition to the commonly held wisdom of mankind. Maybe this is as close as I will ever get to doing a keynote lecture. That's okay. Sometimes I think that the best way to make it today is through a spectacular failure, to be in perpetual comeback mode, to make success of a fleeting pause between 2 exquisitely crafted downturns. I mean, after Britney, Trump, you can't fail any better. At the end, I happen to be an accidental artist. And I wish that from this perspective, the body of work that I've been developing since the late 1960s would stop being overlooked. Even if I don't exist, even if my work at first sight seems a little bit incoherent, even if maybe I should just leave it there. wasn't too egocentric. I really wish that I could separate myself from my work, but as it happens, it's quite difficult. Maybe it just happens to be this way. The work could only be understood through my bumpy journey through this world. See, I'm not much of a speaker, or an actor for that matter. I should just stop talking. This stage might just be shooting from the hip. Maybe I'm just lip syncing my own words. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Vincenzo de Bellis. Should I say Alan Smithee? No. I'm the curator and associate director of programs here at the Walker Art Center, and I'm also the curator of Mario García Torres' Illusion Brought Me Here, the exhibition that opened today here at the Walker. I'm going to say a few thanks before we dive into a conversation, and then we'll open to you guys for some questions. So the exhibition that Mario and I put together is organized together with another institution, Wiels Art Center in Brussels, and I want to thank the director Dirk Snauert and the curator Caroline Dumoulin for their partnership and for being with us tonight. I want to thank also a lot of people that made the show possible, and I'm going to mention their names in order. The Edward Bazinet Foundation, Carlo Bronzini-Vender, Deborah and John Christakos, Isabella and Agustin Coppel, Nicoletta Fiorucci, Karen and Kay Neithoff, Gonzalo Parodi, Jean-Edouard Van Pret, Daniel Rangel, and Enea and Righi and Lorenzo Paini. I really want to thank all of them for their support, and without them this show could not have been possible. I want to thank also my colleague Fabian Leva Barragan that really supported me, Mario, and everyone here at the Walker to make this possible. Thank you, Fabian. And I also want to thank the Walker Public Program Manager, Jacqueline Stallman, for tonight's event. Thank you, Jackie. The exhibition is here at the Walker from today till February 17, and will then go to Brussels in May 15, 2019. As you might know, and if you don't know, I'm going to tell you, it is in Gallery A and B, also known as Target and Friedman. And it also is as a part in the Mediatheque, where there are some films by Mario, 7 films. Tonight's monologue, I'm Not a Flopper, is the first of a trilogy of monologues that Mario wrote in collaborations with the writers, and in this case the writer was the writer and philosopher Aaron Schuster. As part of the exhibition, we will present all the three monologues. After tonight, we will present the Cordality Paradox on November 29th and the Causality of Hesitance on February 7th. I want to thank also other people like David Thank you, David. Your performance tonight was outstanding. Thank you very much. And before I introduce Mario, I also want to thank the Hammer Museum, who lent this piece and gave us permission to perform it. We have here tonight Aram Moshiedi, our colleague and curator at the Hammer, who presented this piece, as David said, as Alan Smithee said, in 2014 via TV show. And now let me introduce you, and I hope you can join me with a round of applause to Mario García Torres. Just a few words about Mario. Mario was born in Monclova, Mexico in 1975. This is a real biography, by the way. Mario received his BFA from the Universidad of Monterrey here it says 1988, impossible, 1998. And his MFA at the CalArt in 2005. His solo presentation of his work have taken place at Museo Tamayo in Mexico City, TBA 21 in Vienna, the Hammer in Los Angeles, Peretz Art Museum, and we have our colleague here, Tobias, in 2014, Peretz Art Museum in Miami, the Project Art Center in Dublin, the Reina Sofia in Madrid, and several other institutions. And he also participated to many art events, such as the Venice Biennale, the Sharjah Biennale, Manifesta, the Berlin Biennale, and Documenta. So again, please join me with welcoming Mario, and let's get started with some questions.
All right, shoot.
It's 7:30. We are at 8 o'clock, they kick us out, so we need to be pretty fast. I'm gonna give, if there's questions in the audience, there are questions in the audience? Okay, anyway, I'm gonna start, and then maybe you can join me. I have 9 questions, so there's plenty, but I hope we can make less so that you have space for asking, whether you want to ask questions to Alan Smithee or Mario or David. By the way, I didn't know that David was joining us on the
Surprise.
Thank God he gave his own bio in the speech, so I don't have to do that. Anyway, Mario, can you please tell us how did you have the idea of doing this?
Yeah, it's good to have the clock up there, because well, it's a piece that I kind of I discovered myself as things were happening. This piece, I made it. I was able to do it because I got a prize. This piece was made presented first in 2007, 8, something like that, and they gave me a prize. I submitted an idea, which was not this. It had to do with Alan Smithee, but I think what I presented was it was some kind of installation where I was going to present all these bad films, or I was interested in that kind of failure rhetoric, but it was not clear how it was going to be presented. And anyway, I don't even remember, but it was not a monologue. And little by little, this prize, I would get a budget and the opportunity to show the piece for the first time in the Frieze Art Fair. I could choose any place in the fair. I could have chosen a booth or the garden or whatever, and I at some point sort of thinking how to present the films. I started to write a little bit, and at some point I thought that it was interesting to work with a ghostwriter. So I started I found a ghostwriter, and we started to make a conversation. I had made some notes, and because I still don't believe that we co-wrote this text. I mean, every time I see it, I don't understand how come all this text was anywhere. And so I started to sort of organize this, and I started to work with the ghostwriter. At some point, I realized that he was not taking it where I thought it would go, and So that was kind of another failure in the process that then led me to Aaron Schuster and to work with him. So with him, we kind of were back and forth writing all these ideas and trying to become. So all the good lines really are Aaron Schuster's. The more general ideas are mine, but Schuster he can speak English, so he's much better at that. And so little by little, it was a very, very long process. Even by the time that we had the text, I had never worked with an actor, and so it took me a long time to realize how many versions of Smithee we could have from the same text. I remember very clearly when you were delivering the text that the first version that when the first time we read the text, he was such a pitiful character. So to find that space between being a failure, but at the same time being proud of that, and sort of trying to kind of negotiate that was a very long process. So it was something that I was formed through a long time. It took us like 3 months or something working with the actor at the time. And so until it was presented, and the only reason why I keep trying to have this piece made or put up on stage is because even though I pretty much know most of the text by heart, every time I see it, I feel like I'm seeing it for the first time. At the time I learned that, like, when you make a performance and you're the author of it, but you can do a lot of notes, but there's a moment where you're off, and whatever happens on stage is still going to be your piece. So I enjoy very much that, and that's kind of the drive that also has made me write other monologues and try to keep doing that, because I enjoy a lot to see it.
Mm. Well, I do have a question at this point for both of you, because you said yesterday when you guys were rehearsing, you said, well, let's make this uncomfortable at the beginning. Can you expand on that, both of you? What did you mean?
I mean, maybe you have your take. I think that has to do with, like, to sort of create. I sort of understood that sort of negotiation between being a failure and thinking how this character could negotiate his persona inside the art world. Like, it's somebody who is not Alan Smithee is somebody who's not related to the art world, but he wants to be an artist, and he has a little bit of I don't know if that comes true, but I want to think that Smithee is a character that he has a little bit of a peripheral version of what the art world language is. So he kind of wants to flirt with that, but he's not very sure. Maybe his idea is a little bit cliche, what a performance is, and so he's kind of sort of trying to negotiate what that one text he thought about was performance in the art world was. So I kind of that's a little bit the idea with this sort of weird moment, that first kind of concrete cheap poetry at the beginning, which is kind of I hope that creates a little bit of kind of a pitiful moment, and then so that then when he starts talking, then he becomes somebody, and so that's how it's. But then I also try to let the actors kind of deal with it, and I try not to be too dictatorial about it. You will know.
We were curious to see how people who had experienced the piece before, would, especially to the opening poem piece, react, because we were thinking about Aram and others that know it and are familiar with it, and they're going to be sitting there going like, what is happening with Flopper? And then also just opening the piece and allowing us to sit and be in this space together and experience the discomfort of what is this relationship? What are we getting into tonight? What are we about to go on together? Like, who are you to me, and who am I to you, and who are we to each other, and what is Mario's role in all this, even though he's sitting in the audience? And I think that brilliant. I mean, Mario's one of the smartest people I know, and he's one of the most talented people I know. And I one of the things that is evoked in this work and a lot of his work is this ability to tip you a little bit over, which is great because then it opens your awareness up, I think, to absorb a bunch of ideas and thoughts to me. Like, and I'm looking at this obviously from my background as a performer, as someone who's typically trying to structure things in a narrative storytelling framework. That's the craft that I come from. So being a part of an art piece, which this is so different, and and finding where these two live together, I think that opening for me was really nerve-wracking and exciting to explore, because I felt like one we could do throughout the piece is continue to get the audience going along with like, oh, this, I see where we're kind of going down this path here, and then you know, give them a little, and then another, and then they're like, and that every time they do that, they have to readjust their frame and their way of looking at this situation that we're all engaged in here, you know, and this reevaluation of what is this conversation we're having, and it forces them to wake up if they're starting to doze, and it also forces them to maybe jostle the way that they're structured and built, and we've all been conditioned to watch someone perform to us in a certain way, and this piece upends that, and I love that.
And David, how was for you different between performing tonight or in Los Angeles, which was a very different environment?
So different.
Can you tell people how?
So when we did it in Los Angeles, basically Aram Moshieri had found us this TV studio in Burbank where truly they had like 3 cameras running. We had a set amount of time in there. Mario and I had spent a lot of time rehearsing and getting to know one another together, but when it was time to go film this, because this was a moving image piece that was going to be projected in a gallery and just filmed once, it was not a situation like I'm used to when I do film things where we're going to do a take and we're going to see what we like there and cut this and like this. No, we shot it in basically one take. We had a couple of extra additional moments, but it was like one, and that was nerve-wracking in a very particular and specific way that jostled me as the tool with which Mario's piece was being presented. So that was thrilling and exciting, and the thing that was very cool for me was the experience of when I would go visit the Hammer, or when I'd hear from friends or people and colleagues I knew who would be at the Hammer, and you walk into a dark room and it's just like watching, it's projected, like a TED Talk kind of, like you're watching a giant YouTube screen maybe at the gallery. Here was very different, and it was more nerve-wracking, and that's a healthy thing, I think, especially considering the nature of this piece and what it is trying to get at, in my opinion. I don't know. Mario and I talk about this piece ad nauseum, and I've tried to pick his brain about it, and I'll probably spend the rest of my life wondering about I Am Not a Flopper, and hopefully continuing to like with all great art, I hope I can spend the next decades of my life, if I'm blessed enough to live that long, just continuing to examine it from all its different sides, you know. But this was scary. And that's a good thing.
Thank you. So I have maybe one more question before opening to maybe 2. Let's see. Let's make this interesting for you. You realized this piece 11 years ago, right? And now you're 43, you were 32, and you were already thinking about being a flopper. Well, that says a lot about you. And then the rest of the performances have title like flop, hesitance, and paradox, which are kind of 3 tricky words. So tell us more about this trilogy, and how did you come, well, you said how did you come to the flopper at the beginning, but how these 3 are connected?
Yeah, well, I mean, this piece was very important for me because I realized many things through the development of it. The other thing I should say to add what David was saying is that the piece, when we worked together, I realized for the first time I had not presented it for a number of years, and when we met for the first time to start rehearsing, I realized that I had learned it, that I had it in my memory. And so since then, I have presented it myself, and it was also translated in Spanish, and we had a theater company in Mexico to present it also, their own version. And
What's the title?
Yo
no soy.
No soy un fracaso. So the piece has many iterations. So throughout that time, I have changed this and dropped that, and so it's still kind of like this script that kind of keeps going around and moving. So it's never really the same thing. But anyhow, I don't know what I'm saying that. But what I hope that these other performances do. I mean, they're all. I hope that I'm interested. I mean, I was first interested in failure because I think that is one of the concepts that we don't think about too much. We're always, I feel like most of the time, most people, the rhetoric in our world is really a capitalistic rhetoric that it's always sort of moving forward and doing things and being the successful and this kind of thing. And this is all a drive that comes from somewhere else. This is not, I don't think that's a human way of living life. That's just kind of a bigger mechanism making us be part of that system so that we can keep paying cash to all these people or somebody else. I don't know who is, but there's always that system that I feel that I'm being driven by. And so that's kind of one thing that I was very invested in at the time, and that's I think in this piece. It's very important. And I think that's kind of what I think it's the core of it, and why I'm interested in that rhetoric. And the next pieces are related in that sense. The next piece that I made is it's called The Causality of Hesitance, which we could talk how that came about.
By the way, you should say that they have not been performed for the stage yet.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Yeah. No.
Right.
Well, one was presented in a gallery with an actor, and
Yeah,
the other
right.
one, The Causality of Hesitance, we made it as a stage monologue, and at the end we couldn't do it as a monologue, so we'd made a video for that one show, and then now it's for the first time going to be presented. But that second one is really about hesitation, and it's kind of at the end of the day it's kind of the same piece. Because it's really kind of against that same sort of capitalistic rhetoric of always moving forward, and that who hesitates is the one who loses, this kind of stuff.
You're basically telling them not to come back to see it, 'cause
well, no, I mean, am I?
you said it's the same piece.
Well, same piece, but that's fine. I will see through this one like many times. I don't care. But yeah, they're all, I think, that there are kind of rhetorical forms that are sort of against sort of that moving or that sort of bigger system that is driving us and sort of trying to make a pause. So the one about hesitation, for example, is really a lot about not doing things and not making decisions, which you can experience. You have experienced through the organization of the show, but because I'm always trying to do that, I'm always trying to say, always trying to buy time, because I know that I'm better when I have more time, and so I'm always trying to make the decision the last moment that I can, because I believe that will make something better or something better of me. So, that's kind of the rhetoric where they live, I think.
Do we have questions from? Yes, one. Yeah.
I'm not sure this is a question, but as I watch this presentation, I'm thinking about the relationship of the artist to the medium, because a director, what's his medium or her medium? Is all these other people. And if all these other people don't get it together and the artist's name is attached to it, at some point the artist has to say, no, I don't want to be part of it. And it kind of reminds me of being a studio artist. And there's a point when you keep on painting, when your painting is going to be garbage and it's just not savable. So if you're a studio artist, you can put it in the trash can. But what do you do with the piece of art that doesn't work, that's going to have your name on it? I mean, is that one of the things that you were kind of wrestling with?
Yeah, but I think it's precisely what I think, Tori, what makes it exciting for me, because I know that if I make a film, I potentially could say, oh, don't present that until the thing is right. I mean, I think that actually many film directors, when they present their films, they're like, well, this is not finished. They're never content with what they do, but in performance or theater, there is a moment where you cannot do anything about it. And I think that like I said, I think that is my reward. I actually enjoy being put in that situation. So that's really what keeps me going there. Of course, I'm trying to, during the rehearsals, I'm trying to get it where I want it to be. But you never know how it's going to work. You never know what's going to happen on the moment. And I think that's the most beautiful thing of it, and that's why I keep being invested in this kind of work.
And it's one of the darker tones in, I think, one of the themes that scares me about your piece is that Adam Smith conspiracy tunnel that we go into for a little while. And I think about that as someone who makes my living working for other people mostly. I rarely get the chance to tell stories using cameras or stages that are my own. So I'm usually working for someone else, and sometimes they're garbage. And then your name is on it, and the marketing machines that be, and the structure of the way the system works is it's going to get put out, and it's going to try and generate as much revenue as possible. So there's a helpless quality that you have sometimes thrust into that, and that I'm glad that part of the piece, Mario, is not the way it ends. I love that, that is close to the end, but then we go into another exploration of shame and failure and etc. But that's my take on that.
Also, I think that at some point now I realize that, because I guess I've been working for a number of years, that you want that every work of art that you make is a good one, but that's most of the time not true. So every work that you do, at some point you have to acknowledge to make them public or not. But it's always, I think that I am happy to think that, I think that's interesting to now for me to see the exhibition, because you see that the work is not always just one object. The work is that practice, that thing that it's moving, and throughout that process there's many failures and things that don't work, and things that but I at the end of the day, I think that what our function as artists is this, to have this kind of, or at least a part of our life to be public. This thing that we're trying to build is public. So these things are moving, and sometimes we're lucky and something works and becomes something interesting. But all those things make that happen. So I have to also cope with bad works, or bad ideas, and I just have to have faith to think that those will take me somewhere. So yeah.
Is there any other? Yes, one more.
Yes, okay. So one of the things I was thinking about while watching your work is just the revolutionary possibility of anonymity as well, and how subverting the cult of celebrity in Hollywood can actually be a revolutionary thing to engage with. And towards the beginning of your work, it's stated, I could be a woman or I could be a collective. And my question for you is, why isn't Alan Smithee a person of color, a woman, or a collective?
Yeah, there's many ways in which it is interesting. I have tried to think of different persons at the same time, to do the piece with 5 persons, to have an older person do it, and with the first time that we did it, it was a very difficult thing to cast, because we at some point we even approached in London. We approached a casting agency, and we said, well, we want somebody who's a script, and somebody who's invisible, and somebody who doesn't know who he is. So it was very difficult, and they came with a broad group of people, and so it was very difficult. And it turns out that, or the way that we resolved it was that the actor who did it for the first time, it was somebody who actually had a kind of, he was an actor, he's an actor, but had a kind of peripheral relationship to art. And so at the end we understood that it was his language and his way, that he knew a certain language related to art that made him fit. So it was not about faces, it was not about color. That's kind of why also it says at some point that now today we took out a tiny little line when the character says, apart from the
Accent.
At some point it said also the accent, because the
You had done
actor.
it? Oh, and the other actor.
The actor was a British English, and you wouldn't think that. So, there's kind of these remarks, because what I'm trying to get at is that this sort of face, this physical aspect, is not what is interesting. Is not what is important. So far, I've done it a few times, and it turns out that when we were looking into the second time that we will do it, we found David, who had worked with Aram, and it just turns out that he was somebody who knew and we could relate to each other. So the casting is more related to that than that. I think that I wish sometimes it would be a chorus and things like that, but I've always failed to think that it will be coherent and understandable, and that's why I have kept it so far with one person. We've discussed now, I kind of fantasize about the idea that instead of going with the text, David could do it forever and ever, and many, until 10 years later and 20 years later, and so to think about farther than the image, and to try to, instead of trying to change that, to actually stick to one person and see those changes in that one person. So kind of forget about if he's white. Where's your last name from? Anyway?
It's Iranian and Italian and Irish, but I would love to. Yeah, I want to. 25 years from now, we're making a date to come back here, and then on my deathbed, I want Mario to come with a camera, and I want to do Smithee, and I mean seriously, I want to do it on. But yeah, it's interesting too. Just one point I'd like to make is that it feels like putting an actor in this role for this as a tool that Mario uses, and it's got to be understood. This isn't like you're not casting a play. I'm just a tool for Mario's piece. So I'm like almost like a prop, or like maybe a piece of paint or something that you'd like. We're not up here discussing my character's intentions or motivations. He's literally guiding me through drinking the water here, and you're pausing here, and you're talking this here. So I think the skill set that comes with maybe knowing acting, but I think there's this extra layer into the onion of the piece that is fascinating when it's an actor. We have that whole conversation that I'm having with myself, and I think that's it's a little bit of a. It's great. It like messes me up a little bit,
Yeah, I think if we will be coherent with the story of Alan Smithee, he would be an older white guy from Hollywood, you know, somebody who's slightly crazy and is older, much older than you, and much more poor or something, like kind of.
Wow. How does he
you know,
know?
this is his clothes.
Look him up on IMDb. The crazy thing too, when Mario and I first met, he didn't know this, but I had played a character in a weird art short film called Alan Smithee. But Alan Smithee now he's up to like, he's
We
like
need to update.
112 credits, I think, on IMDb. And they keep coming.
They add more than they take out.
Yeah.
So we have time for one more. Yes, maybe two.
The decision to go from doing it yourself to an actor. Sorry, the decision from playing it yourself to go to an actor. What did that imply, or how did that, or what does that do for the piece? Because you as Smithee is something very different as an actor. The displacement to an actor, or the artist as actor as Smithee, or whatever. That decision.
Yeah, I mean, rhetorically, it's actually very, very difficult for me to do it because there's so many references. So when I've done it, there's many. I tweak it a lot, and it becomes a very complex thing. So now there's sort of 2 or 3 different layers when he's Smithee, when he's David, and when he's referring to an artist and this kind of. But then when I do it, it becomes a little bit too complex, I think. So I think that's to start with. Just rhetorically, I think it's very complicated, or less clear. Becomes less clear, but then it was something that I kind of did for. Kind of to try out. I've never been a kind of. I never thought of myself as somebody on a stage or like dancing or doing anything public in that sense, and I started doing it because I thought it was interesting to sort of become somebody else, or I realized that by becoming somebody else. I could allow myself to do something else. So sort of that exercise of allowing myself to do that, I think that it's kind of a process, or sort of, as an artist, I think that what it implies, I don't know if it comes true, but I think that what it implies is this sort of that idea of letting things happen and sort of exposing myself to as a medium, as a structure for things to happen in my persona as well. So I think that creates a whole different layer, but I'm not so sure that it's successful. And on the other side, I enjoy doing it, but I think I enjoy it more to see the piece again. So it's kind of a difficult decision every time. I mean, there's something that makes me kind of jump into the thing and do it, which is very strange because I don't feel that in any other situation. I don't know if it's going anywhere, what I'm saying.
You have one more? Yes. I'm sorry, I think it's the last one.
That was fantastic. And I really loved the opening sequence where you were, saying flopper, flop, plop, and it really reminded me of kind of Klaus Oldenburg and his artist manifesto, which begins, "I am foreign art," and you mentioned, Mario, that this was kind of reminiscent of kind of this cheap concrete poetry, which I think Oldenburg also uses in his manifesto. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about if you were consciously kind of engaging with that form of the artist manifesto, and Oldenburg in his manifesto, he says, "I am for something," he's standing for something, and here, you're saying that I am not this. And so I was wondering if you were kind of consciously engaging with that history of the artist manifesto.
Now that you think, I think that at some point it was kind of that. It is a kind of rhetorically, I think that at some point I think that kind of the beginning of the text, it had a little bit of that feeling of how could that guy present himself? How could that, because the manifesto is that sort of space. If it's today, it's a little bit of a cliche, to sort of express yourself in as if there's only one way to do things. That's what a manifesto is, I think, most of the time. And so it is. I think that today it's also seemed like where does that leave? Is that somebody also who has a kind of slightly peripheral understanding of the thing? So at some point, actually, I think that there was some kind of text that the manifesto was that, but it was also could be a space where he fights for something. So this failure, it's also a space where failure can become a strong thing when you defend it. So it was never, I don't think it went anywhere, but I think that maybe it is still the sort of rhetorics. In a way, it is, the whole thing is that. I don't think that specifically the sort of poetry thing, it's that. But I think in general, he's defending that which has never been defended before, which is bad films.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you, David. Thank you, Mario. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, David.
And before we leave, I just want to say one more thank to our colleague Alexandra Ninkum, who was amazing with our writings for the exhibition, and I didn't thank her before. So thank you, Alexandra, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.